Hello and welcome to Decision NYC with Ben Max. I'm Ben Max, the host and executive editor of Gotham Gazette. The 2021 New York City election season is underway, and it's poised to be the most significant municipal election in decades. All of city government is on the ballot, and because so few incumbents are eligible to run for their current seats due to term limits, New Yorkers are electing many new office holders and the next roster of leadership for our city. There will be a new mayor of New York City elected here in 2021, as well as a new city controller, new borough presidents, many new city council members. And that's not all that's on the ballot. A number of incumbents are eligible to run and are seeking re-election. And there's a very crowded and competitive race for Manhattan District Attorney. Party primaries are set for June, and the general election in the fall will culminate on November 2nd. This is the first full set of municipal elections that will feature early voting, as well as the new ranked choice voting system, which applies to party primary and special elections only. And we'll explain that one in a separate show. This city election cycle would be of enormous importance under more usual circumstances, but it's unfolding at a time of great crisis for our city, raising the stakes of the decision that you, the voter, will make. The new wave of city leadership will, quite obviously, make or break the city's recovery from the devastation of COVID-19 and its impact on health, families, jobs, education, and more. So we're pleased to bring you this new series of interviews with the candidates running for mayor of New York City, as well as with candidates for other offices. These one-on-one conversations will help you to get to know the candidates better, learn about their backgrounds, their policy platforms, where they stand on key issues, and what their vision is for the future of the city. We hope this and other interviews will help you sort through your many choices and make an informed decision when it's time to vote. So joining me now today via Zoom is Joycelyn Taylor, a Democratic candidate for mayor of New York City. Welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's good to see you. So let's jump right in. What's the sort of broad overview? Who are you? What's your background? And what brings you to running for mayor of New York City?
Well, I am a born and bred New Yorker. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in East New York. I actually grew up in a NYCs development, pink houses. I'm a single mom. I went to school in New York. I've obtained my degree at Long Island University, which is in Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn. I'm an advocate, and I'm also a small business owner. And I think the thing that has driven me to want to run for mayor is because I am an everyday New Yorker. And I feel the pains of what other everyday New Yorkers feel. And to be quite honest, everyday New Yorkers are tired. And I had grown tired as well. And I had two choices. I could sit back and complain, or I could put myself in a position of leadership to create the change that I think we all want to see.
Interesting. So say a little bit more about your background and the work that you've done, the work that you do. Just a little bit more about whether it's a community civic involvement or your business work.
Well, I work for a Fortune 500 company. I also started a nonprofit organization, the New York City MWBE Alliance. And the goal of the alliance is to assist minority and women-owned businesses with getting access to opportunity. And the reason why I thought that that was so important is because we all know when minority and women-owned businesses get access to opportunity, they are the community. So they employ people in the community. And that employment means that we can address other issues that people are experiencing as it relates to housing, as it relates to education, as it relates to job opportunities. So I thought with the city spending $22 billion on the procurement of goods and services, it was important that we ensure that the diversity of the dollars going into the pot match how those dollars are spent and who those dollars are spent with. As it relates to my business, I own a general contracting firm, tailor-made contracting, and it's actually part of my experience with being a small business owner and trying to work with the city that made me decide that we really need people who have had that experience and know what the barriers are, know what the challenges are as it relates to trying to get access to opportunity to work, not just on the city, but the state level as well.
That's interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What's broken from your experience? You have a certain subset of experience. You're not working in city government, but as you said, you've worked with city government in some ways or tried to. What's broken? What do you think is broken in city government that you want to fix about the way that city government kind of operates and runs?
Well, on various levels of city government, one thing we know, we've done a lot of data and analysis. So there's nothing that we don't know about in this city, but we don't take that information and actually apply it so we can implement procedures that work for the people that we're either trying to serve or who are trying to do work with the city. If I look at it from a small business perspective, a lot of times for the small business owners, it's very challenging because the process that the city has for them to work with them, it just doesn't work. The city is actually building the city and doing projects on the dollars and the finances and the credit of small business owners who could afford it the least. As a small business owner, you have to borrow money to do the city's project. So I think that's one of the issues, because from my perspective, that's discriminatory in nature, because by you saying that, you're saying that you only want to do business with people who have money. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the challenges. And even just on the smallest of levels, I'm going to give you an example. I had to go to the Department of Health to obtain a death certificate for my sister. And when I went there, I literally spent 4 to 5 hours at the Department of Health trying to get a death certificate rather. That should be a simple process for the average New Yorker. And when I spoke to the staff and the people there, they were saying because it was the beginning of the year, that it's normally very crowded there and the wait times are like that. So if we know that, why don't we staff up at the beginning of the year to make the process easier for people? Mm-hmm. And I think because I've had these experiences, I deal with the city myself. I have to go to, DMV. I have to go to Department of Health. I have to go to SBS. I know what my experience is like. And if I'm experiencing it, I can guarantee you that there are thousands of other people are having these same experiences and no one is doing anything to change it.
So you bring your lived experience, as you just outlined, you bring your business experience and some of that interplay with the city. But do you think that qualifies you to be mayor of New York City? This is a question for all candidates of mayor, because this is one of the biggest jobs in the country, whether it's private sector or public sector. Do you feel like that qualifies you to take over city government with 300,000 plus employees, a $90 billion budget? Some people might say, yeah, we need someone from outside the system to sort of come in with the type of experience you're talking about. But there might be others who say, I don't know if I want to hand over city government to someone who doesn't have experience, sort of deeper experience in city government. How do you answer that?
I answer that and it's a very good question. And I answer it by saying this. The being mayor of New York is just that, it's a job. And it's not just all about me. The lived experience is very important because no one knows better than you what your challenges are and how to fix them, right? So coming from nature, to owning my business, to working with the city, that's a lot of lived different and varied experiences. But you have to keep in mind also, it's not just me as being the leader and being the mayor of the city. It's who I surround myself by. The mayor doesn't have 300,000 people directly reporting to him. Mm-hmm. It's about having the right leadership and having the right people in place whose goals are aligned with mine to ensure that we obtain the results that we want to obtain. So I think from, the everyday person's perspective, the job looks huge. It looks humongous. But we have to keep it in perspective that we don't, the number of people that are reporting to the mayor are not, exorbitant. The number of people that, have direct interaction is not that large. It's about having the right leadership in place because it's not just about me.
And so that really gets at the question of leadership skills, of management skills, of vision. So talk a little bit more about, sort of what do you consider your greatest strengths or skills as a leader? Do you have strong management skills, or are you much more of a delegator with a broad vision? What kind of sort of traits and characteristics would you bring to the role?
Well, one of the things that I bring to the role that I think is extremely important is the ability to listen. Because I think government has gotten away from listening to the people. And that's the reason why we have such huge problems today. So as a manager, I like to listen. And I also like to look at who I'm working with and see their strengths and set them up for success, right? Because you don't know everything. So it's about listening and putting people in places where they can be successful so that all of you can shine. So that's my management skill. I think everyone brings something positive to the table. You have to be able to tap into that and allow people to shine. So, I listen. I'm not inflexible. Everything that I say doesn't necessarily have to be the best idea.
Mhm.
So I think those skills are very, very important, and especially in this time, because the people of the city have been ignored. Especially, look at the people in NYCHA, 600,000 residents that elected officials have been comfortable with ignoring for over a decade. We need someone who's ready to listen.
So why don't we stick with NYCHA now? We're going to come to that a little bit later, but you brought it up a couple of times, and obviously your lived experience, and it is one of the biggest crises facing the city right now is crumbling public housing in need of tens of billions of dollars in repairs. What are your thoughts on how to get there? What would be the NYCHA rescue plan under your administration?
Well, one of the things that I want to look at as it relates to NYCHA, and I think is very important, is the opportunity to give NYCHA residents home ownership opportunities. But let me say this, when we talk about NYCHA, we always talk about this $40 billion price tag. And, the reality of the situation is that if the federal government came tomorrow and dropped $40 billion on City Hall, we wouldn't have the workforce available to do $40 billion worth of work. So what we need to do is come up with a strategic plan that will outline how we will address the issues, one, based upon risk and what's needed most by the tenants. We should have had a plan in place that says, listen, this year we're fixing all of the boilers, we're replacing them. Next year, we're doing all of the apartments in this development. Even, we have to have a plan of action as it relates to how we're going to make steps to get NYCHA in a position where it's no longer, it's no longer in disarray. It's no longer falling apart.
And so that's an interesting piece on what you do with the money. In terms of how to bring in that money, a lot of people obviously would say the federal government needs to step back up, needs to provide a huge amount of what NYCHA needs. But I don't think anybody would really realistically say the federal government will provide all of what NYCHA needs. So what do you think about in terms of ways to raise the money that NYCHA needs for those repairs? And if you have that good plan in place for what to do with the money, but how to get to the money to fund that?
Yeah, so here's the thing about it. We still have, even with the pandemic, we still have money in the city, and I'm hoping that the federal government is going to step up and provide us with additional funds as well. But as my mom used to always say, it's not what you have, it's what you do with what you have. So, when I'm mayor, we have to reshift our priorities and focus on ensuring that everything that we do is people first. We may have to put aside some projects that don't impact people's lives in a positive way, like spending $11 billion on jails. Maybe we have to revisit that. Maybe that's not the best thing to do in this time. Listen, and we talk about infrastructure all the time, but here's the thing. People can't live in bridges and subways. Right? So we got to look at the dollars that we're spending on infrastructure, if those projects are really needed at this time, or if it's something that it poses an immediate risk, and can we take a portion of those funds and allocate it to things that relate to housing, because housing is a huge crisis in this city.
We both mentioned the COVID-19 crisis. Let's speak a little bit more broadly, and maybe we'll come back to NYCHA if there's some more time, but what do you think are the keys to the city's recovery from what COVID-19 has wrought? And if you are taking over in January of 2022, what are some things that you think at this point, and obviously lots can change in the time between now and then, but what are some things you think you would be putting in place to try to help the city recover from what the pandemic has brought here?
Well, I hope by 2022, we're definitely in a much better place because, people's lives are being impacted every day. But I think we've had a lot of lessons learned from this pandemic, and we can establish a lot of best practices. But, my goal is to ensure we talk about, communities of color that have, are disproportionately affected, and that there's disparity in those communities. But we have to actually start letting our words and our actions match. So we have to reinvest in those communities, and we've seen the areas where they suffered as it relates to access to healthcare, as it relates to PPE, as it relates to even education. So, when 2022 comes, I hope at that point we've learned nothing else from this pandemic, is that every child in every school should have access to technology. When I am mayor, when kids enter first grade, you're going to get a piece of technology. When you enter junior high school, you're going to get another piece of technology. When you go to high school, same thing, because that's the world we live in. And if we want children to be successful, we have to give them the tools and the resources that they need so that they can see that success. But also we need a lot of support for the small business community, because they are the backbones of our communities. So I want to see, us support the small business community, not in a way that puts them in a position of, again, because remember I said that in order to do work with the city, you already had to borrow money. This pandemic happens and we ask them to borrow money again. So we have to, utilize the funds that we have in a way that, if we want to see an end to disparity and just people being disproportionately affected, then we will spread the funds that we have around in a manner that ends that, and we'll do it intentionally.
Are there other things you think city government can and should do even now, well before this election and well before the winner would take office, but are there things you think city government can and should do to spur an economic revival? You've spoken a little bit about some things related to small businesses, but are there any things you think, do you think the city should be requiring, or not requiring, let's say, incentivizing businesses to be bringing more workers back to the office? Do you think the city, should be doing more in terms of tax breaks, just overall, sales tax, holidays, things like that? Are there things you think the city should do? Or are there things that would be part of your platform for 2022 to spur more job growth and business growth?
Well, I think the city itself can utilize more of its funds to create the job opportunities themselves, right? And when we look at housing, if we address the housing issue, if we start building additional housing or retrofitting maybe vacant apartment buildings or vacant office space, then that's going to create job opportunities, and that's very important. So I think that that's one of the things the city can take the lead in. And being a leader in creating opportunities as well. Listen, there's a lot of things that need to be done around this city, right? There's a lot of ways that we can employ people. We can go into communities and clean them up. We can, do various different things that help to improve the quality of life for the residents of this city. So I do think that we need to incentivize small business owners, especially though, because they've been the ones that have been hardest hit. And I can't imagine by 2022, a lot of these small business owners were already struggling prior to the pandemic. I can't imagine by 2022, we'll be at a point where they're whole already.
What else would be key for you, whether it's recovery from what COVID-19 has brought, or just more broadly speaking in terms of your platform? Are there other sort of focus areas? Are there other big ideas you want people to know about? Are there things related to, as you mentioned, housing or quality of life that you would try to put in place? Changes to how the current mayor approaches affordable housing, neighborhood, rezonings to spur growth. What else would be sort of on the list for Joycelyn Taylor in terms of, some of the priority areas and the big ideas?
Well, one of the things that we do have to deal with is the homelessness issue and mental health, because I think this pandemic has really brought that issue to the forefront and to light. So when I look at my platform and when I look at what the priorities are, like I said, my platform is about people first. So when I look at what my priorities are, affordable housing and homelessness and food insecurity are my priorities, because those are basic rights that everyone in this city, listen, everyone in this country should have that. Everyone should have a roof over their head. and everyone should have, food on the table. That's a basic right that everyone should have. So when I look at my priorities, those are, two of my priorities.
How do you do that? What's key to getting people out of homeless shelters? What's key to preventing them from going in? Are there things the city's currently doing that need to be scrapped? Are there things that need to be expanded? Are there new programs that need to be implemented? In terms of eviction protection, in terms of moving people from shelter to permanent housing, in terms of building more housing. What do you think?
Well, one of the things I've said is that you address homelessness by giving homeless people addresses, right? I'm going to give you an example of this. If we're spending $11 billion on jails, right? If we just took $2 billion of that money, we invested it in creating housing for homeless people, we can build approximately, because it costs about $50 million to build a building, we can build approximately 8,000 to 10,000 units and get 8,000 to 10,000 homeless people in permanent housing, which means that if we're spending $3.2 billion a year on housing, on homelessness, and that's $53,000 per person, which means that if we give permanent housing to 10,000 people, we will save $530 million. So we have to look at homelessness no longer being big business. And we have to take funds and reallocate them, just like we have to reallocate funds from policing, right? We have to take funds from other projects and reallocate them to provide permanent housing so we can bring that housing cost number down and we can finally eradicate the situation. Is
the private housing market part of that picture? Do you think that the private market needs to be, a key piece of how the city approaches affordable housing? The current mayor has, obviously, that's been sort of his philosophy of trying to leverage market rate development to require affordable housing as part of it. Do you think the future of the city is also, that should be part of the approach, that, the city helps to incentivize developers to build a combination of market and affordable? Or are you talking much more about using the city's capital dollars, city government kind of on its own, really trying to do more of a housing program?
Listen, I don't think that we need to incentivize developers, right? If the city needs to build affordable housing, the city needs to build affordable housing. It shouldn't be about development and making money. How many more luxury apartments at $2,000 are we going to build when we know that that's not the makeup of the city? They have 40% or 60% of luxury condos that are sitting vacant right now. We want to build affordable housing. We have to build affordable housing, but we also have to look at the data we have as it relates to how much people in this money the people in the city are making. What are the makeup of those families? And we have to build to suit. We're building housing that isn't suitable for the people that live in this city.
You mentioned a couple of things I want to follow up on. You mentioned moving money from the jails plan, the idea of closing down the Rikers jail complex and building 4 new jails. Does that mean if you want to sort of strip billions from that plan, that you'd scrap that plan altogether? Would you reverse course that the city's on and keep the Rikers facilities open in some way, or rehab them and not build the new jails?
I don't think that we need to keep Rikers open, but I do think that we need to revisit the current plan, because a lot has changed since that plan was put into place. And that's what I talk about what I mean when I talk about having flexibility, right? That might have been a great plan 2 years ago, but in this moment, is that the smartest way for us to proceed? So I think that that's something that we have to look at, really look at. And we have to decide that in this moment, given everything that's going on, is that the best utilization of the funds that we have available? And what things can we put in place and maybe revisit that at another time, building new jails? And why don't we utilize that money in a proactive kind of manner so that we don't create a society where people are going to jail, right? If you create job, how people don't end up in jail? Give them a job opportunity. Mm-hmm. They'll be at work every day.
So the connective tissue here is also something else you mentioned, which is policing, approach to policing, allocation of funds to policing. So what's the Joycelyn Taylor sort of platform, the big pillars of how you'd approach running the police department if you're elected mayor?
Well, I do believe that, it's sad that we have gotten so caught up in this term, defund the police, that we use it as a means to pretend that we don't know what it means, right? If we want to, we have to look at what we want ultimately. Do we want a better society? Do we want people living on this earth who are hopeful, who are purposeful, who are decent people that are contributing to this society? If we do, what do we need to do to create that? Policing is not the answer. The answer to that is to create opportunities, to give people a decent education, to create opportunities to have jobs so that they're able to have food on the table every day. It's to help them to be their best selves. So will crime ever be at a point where it's 0%? Probably not. But we can do a lot better at being proactive about creating the scenario that we want instead of being reactive.
So we're in our last 2 minutes here. It's been a good conversation. Yeah, time flies, right? I want to ask you just a few sort of yes or no questions to wrap up. Obviously, each of these could be a whole discussion of its own, but in the time we have, what letter grade would you give Mayor Bill de Blasio for his tenure to this point?
That's a low question, Ben.
Roughly.
Huh?
Roughly what letter grade?
Roughly, I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give him a B minus.
Okay.
B
Do
minus.
you favor the legalization of adult use recreational marijuana?
Yes.
Would you consider private development on NYCHA land, sometimes called NYCHA infill development, as part of a NYCHA plan? Would that be part of your NYCHA rescue plan?
No, the NYCHA residents don't want it. They live there. The answer is no.
What level of income do you think, if you think taxes should be raised on high earners, starting at what level of income?
I think the taxes should be raised. We should contribute where we can so that everyone is okay. And I would say that, Joe Biden has it right at about 400,000.
Okay. Do you favor a form of commercial rent control in the city?
For commercial tenants?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we talk about affordable housing. We never talk about affordable commercial space.
Okay. Would you like to see the New York City Board of Elections sort of blown up in its current form and a new city agency under the mayor's control created instead?
I think we should look at how the Board of Elections operates. I don't know if it should be under mayoral control, though.
All right. And finally, do you have a role model in politics, somebody that you would say sort of try to look up to and emulate?
Shirley Chisholm.
Okay. Well, Joycelyn Taylor, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Decision NYC with Ben Max. Key decisions for New York City voters are coming up in June and the fall. There's a lot on the line for all of us in the future of our city. I hope this conversation was helpful. I'm Ben Max. See you next time.